Years passed, and the house where the girl once lived grew quiet. Dust gathered on the windowsills, and the garden outside became wild with weeds. The piano, still in the basement, stood untouched most days. But sometimes at night, neighbors said they could hear faint music drifting from the house. A soft, sad tune that seemed to carry the memory of something long gone. After the girl disappeared, her mother never moved away. She couldn't. She said the piano still had her daughter's soul, that leaving it behind would be like losing her all over again. She cleaned the keys, kept the bench in place, and spoke to the piano as if it could hear her. Some people thought she had lost her mind, but she didn't care. Every time she sat there, she felt her daughter near. One day, a man who ran a local music school visited the house. He had heard the stories about the piano and wanted to see it for himself. The mother hesitated, but when he promised to take care of it, she agreed. Maybe, she thought, her daughter's spirit could finally be at peace if the piano was played again. The piano was moved carefully to the music school. For a while it sat in the corner of a bright room filled with young students. It looked ordinary enough, an old upright with polished wood and slightly faded keys. But from the first day it arrived, everyone could feel something different about it. When the first student sat down to play, a strange stillness filled the room. The notes that came out sounded deeper, more emotional than before. The teacher paused and said, "That piano. It sounds like it has a story." No one understood what he meant, but the students started to treat it with quiet respect. They said it made their music feel alive, like it understood them. Over time, odd things began to happen. Some students said they felt another pair of hands guiding theirs, helping them find the right notes. Others said they heard faint humming between the keys, like someone softly singing along. One boy even said that when he closed his eyes, he saw a figure sitting beside him, smiling gently before fading away. No one could explain it, but the piano never frightened anyone. Instead, it comforted them. Students who had struggled with confidence began to play with emotion they never had before. It was as if the piano gave them courage, like it wanted them to be seen. Word spread about the mysterious piano that could make anyone play beautifully. The music school became busier, and soon, students from other towns came just to sit at its bench. But none of them knew the truth, that the soul of a lonely girl lived within those keys, still longing to share her music with the world. One evening, after the last class, the music teacher stayed behind to tidy up. The room was empty, but he could hear soft notes playing. He turned around and the piano lid was open. A melody floated through the air, gentle and sad. He froze, listening. The song seemed familiar, one of the pieces he had heard his student play before she disappeared years ago. When the music stopped, he whispered, "Is that you?" The silence that followed felt like an answer. The next morning, he told the story to the class. Most of them smiled politely, thinking he was just being poetic. But a few believed him, especially those who had felt that strange warmth while playing. From that day, they started calling the piano the Invisible Girl. It became a quiet tradition. Before every performance, students would touch the piano's keys and whisper a "thank you," as if asking for her blessing. The years went on. Generations of students played that piano, and each left with something more than skill. They left with heart. The piano became famous for inspiring emotion in every piece played on it. People said you could always tell when someone had learned from it. Their music carried something special, something human. One winter evening, a new student joined the school. She was shy, quiet, and rarely spoke in class. She reminded the teacher of the girl from the old story. When he asked if she wanted to try the piano, she nodded nervously and sat down. Her hands trembled as she touched the keys. The first few notes were uncertain, but soon the melody grew stronger. The sound that came out was pure and full of emotion, the kind that makes you forget to breathe for a moment. As she played, a faint glow seemed to shimmer around the piano, almost invisible but warm. The teacher felt a chill down his spine, not of fear, but of something sacred. When the girl finished, she looked up, tears in her eyes. "I don't know why," she said softly, "but it felt like someone was playing with me." The teacher smiled. Maybe someone was. That night, after everyone left, the teacher stayed behind again. He placed his hand gently on the piano and whispered, "Thank you." The keys pressed down by themselves, playing a short, gentle chord, like a reply. Years later, the piano grew too old to use. Its strings had worn thin and the wood had cracked in places. The school decided to replace it with a newer one, but the teacher couldn't let it be thrown away. Instead, they placed it in the school's entrance hall, surrounded by photographs of past students. A small sign was added above it that read, "For the girl who played until she became unseen." Visitors often stopped to read the plaque. Some smiled, some felt a strange sadness they couldn't explain. Children would press random keys, and sometimes the piano would respond with a note that no one had touched. Over the years, people forgot the exact details of the story, but the feeling remained. The piano was no longer just an instrument, it was a memory, a piece of someone's soul. Even as it aged and the school changed, it never lost that presence. On quiet evenings when the halls were empty, the janitor swore he could still hear music echoing faintly, the same soft, lonely tune that started it all. Back at the old house, the mother eventually grew old. She visited the music school once before she passed. When she saw the piano standing proudly in the hall, tears filled her eyes. She touched the keys and a single note rang out, clear and beautiful. She smiled and whispered, "I knew you'd find your way." As she turned to leave, a soft breeze brushed past her, carrying the faintest hint of a melody. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The piano stayed in the school for many more years. Students came and went, the world changed, but the story never died. It became something passed down, a tale about a girl who was invisible until her music made her unseen but never forgotten. And though her name was lost to time, her soul remained, echoing in every note played by those who needed to be heard. Sometimes late at night, when the city outside was quiet and the moonlight touched the school's windows, the piano would play by itself, just a few soft notes. The sound would drift through the hallways, gentle as a whisper. And anyone who happened to hear it would feel something inside them stir. A reminder that even those the world forgets can leave behind something eternal. The girl had vanished long ago, but her music never stopped. It lived on, unseen, unheard by some, but always there, waiting for the next quiet soul to sit down and listen. The days began to blur together. She barely noticed the sunrise anymore, or the way the light touched the curtains in her room. Her world had shrunk down to the piano and the strange bond she shared with it. Every note she played seemed to pull her deeper into something she didn't fully understand. The sound had grown heavier, and sometimes when she pressed a key, it echoed like it came from far away, from somewhere beyond the walls of her home. Her mother tried to reach her, but she couldn't. Every attempt to talk ended with silence or short answers. There was always a distance between them, like an invisible wall. Her mother didn't understand what was happening, but she could sense her daughter slipping away. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the hills, the girl sat down at the piano once more. Her fingers hesitated above the keys, but the pull was too strong. She played a soft tune that she used to hum as a child, something innocent and warm. But the piano twisted it. The sound came out different, darker, full of longing. The room seemed to breathe with the rhythm. The shadows stretched along the walls as if they were listening. She closed her eyes and kept playing. The music wrapped around her like a blanket in a cage at the same time. It was beautiful, but it felt wrong. The air grew colder. Her heart began to beat in sync with the notes. Then suddenly she saw flashes of faces, faint and almost transparent, floating in her mind. They were people she didn't know, but they looked sad, like they were reaching out for her. She gasped and stopped. The piano went silent and the images vanished. Her hands shook. She backed away from the bench and pressed her back against the wall. What was happening to her? The piano was showing her things that couldn't be real. And yet, deep down, she knew it was trying to tell her something. The next morning, she woke up to find her reflection weaker than before. Her skin looked faded, her eyes dull. When she tried to comb her hair, her hand almost seemed to pass through the strands for a second. She dropped the brush and stared at her fingers. They were trembling. She knew what this meant. The more she played, the less human she became. But the piano kept calling. She heard it in her sleep, in the silence between her thoughts, in the rhythm of her heartbeat. It wasn't just music anymore. It was a voice whispering for her to return. That day at school, she barely spoke. Her friends tried to ask if she was okay, but she didn't know how to explain. How could she tell them that her piano was alive, that it wanted her? She smiled and said she was fine, but her eyes betrayed her. When she looked in the mirror later that afternoon, the glass showed only part of her face fading around the edges like mist. That evening, she sat before the piano again. The moment her fingers touched the keys, she felt warmth spread through her chest. The sound that came out was soft, fragile, and heartbreakingly beautiful. It was the kind of music that made you remember every person you ever loved and lost. Tears fell from her eyes, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. As the music filled the room, something strange happened. The lights flickered, and she could see faint shapes around her, outlines of people standing by the piano listening. They didn't speak, but their presence was calm, not frightening. She felt like she had stepped into another world, a world made of sound and silence. When she finished playing, the figures slowly faded, but one of them lingered a little longer, a woman with kind eyes. The girl whispered, "Who are you?" But the woman only smiled before vanishing. The piano let out one last soft note, and the room went still. The girl sat there for a long time, her hands resting on the keys. She felt weak, drained, but also peaceful. She didn't understand it, but she knew that she was part of something bigger than herself now. Days turned into weeks, and she spent nearly all her time with the piano. Her mother tried everything, taking her outside, turning off the lights, even locking the piano room. But no matter what she did, the girl always found her way back. The connection was too strong. One night, a thunderstorm shook the house. The sound of rain against the windows mixed with the low hum of the piano. The girl sat down and began to play. The storm roared, lightning flashed, and her music grew louder, more desperate. It was as if the piano was fighting the storm, trying to outplay the thunder. Her mother burst into the room, shouting for her to stop, but the girl couldn't hear. The music had taken her completely. The piano's notes were glowing faintly now, like fireflies. Her mother reached out to pull her away, but when she touched her, her daughter's body felt cold, almost not solid. "Please," her mother cried. "Stop this." But the girl kept playing. The sound swelled until it filled every corner of the house. Then suddenly there was a sharp final note and everything went quiet. The lights went out. The storm outside faded to a soft drizzle. Her mother called her name, shaking, but there was no answer. The bench was empty. The piano sat still, its lid open, the keys gleaming faintly in the darkness. Her mother screamed for her, searched the entire house, but she was gone. Only her music remained, the faint sound of that last melody echoing in the air, as if the piano remembered her touch. When morning came, the police arrived. They searched every room, every corner, but there was no sign of her. One of them touched the piano and a single note played by itself, soft and low. Everyone froze. The mother broke down in tears, clutching her daughter's photo to her chest. The piano was later moved to the basement, covered with a sheet, and left untouched. But sometimes, late at night, her mother swore she could hear it, faint music drifting up through the floorboards. A tune her daughter used to play. Months passed, and the town slowly moved on. The story of the vanished girl became a whisper, something people talked about in quiet voices. Some said she ran away. Others said she had been taken by something beyond this world. But her mother never stopped believing that her daughter was still there, somewhere inside that piano, waiting for someone to listen again. One afternoon, when everything was still, the mother walked down to the basement. She pulled the sheet off the piano and sat down on the bench. Her hands trembled as she touched the keys. At first, nothing happened. Then she played the first few notes of her daughter's favorite song. The melody came alive, soft and warm, wrapping around her like a hug. As the last note faded, she whispered, "I miss you." For a moment, she thought she heard a faint reply, not in words, but in sound. A gentle chord rose from the piano, tender and full of love. She smiled through her tears. Maybe her daughter wasn't gone. Maybe she had just become something the world couldn't see, unseen but still there, still playing. From that night on, the mother would visit the piano often. Sometimes she'd play and sometimes she'd just listen. And every time she did, she felt a presence beside her, light, warm, familiar. The house was no longer silent. It was filled with music again, soft and endless, like a promise that love never truly disappears. The morning light crept softly into the small room, landing on the piano that had now become the center of her world. For days she hadn't stopped playing. Each note was like a heartbeat, each melody a whisper of her soul. But something strange had started happening. Every time she touched the keys, the air around her felt different, thicker, almost alive. It wasn't frightening, not yet. It was more like the piano was trying to speak back. She didn't tell anyone about it. Who would believe her? Her mother already thought the piano was taking up too much of her time, and her classmates barely noticed she existed. They only spoke to her when they needed something: notes from class, a spare pen, a quiet place to hide their gossip. She never complained, though. She had grown used to being invisible, but now, as her fingers moved over the piano, she started to feel that invisibility turning into something deeper, something she couldn't name. The music came out softer each time, but it filled the whole room like mist. When she stopped playing, it was as if the world held its breath. That afternoon, her music teacher came by to check on her progress. He was one of the few people who noticed her talent. As soon as he stepped inside, he paused. "You've been practicing," he said, his voice low. "But the sound is different. What have you been doing?" She looked at the keys, unsure how to answer. "I just play what I feel." He nodded slowly, though there was something uneasy in his eyes. "That's good. But don't lose yourself in it. Music can take you places you don't always want to go." After he left, she sat in silence. His words echoed in her mind, but she couldn't stop. The piano was calling again. That night, as rain fell outside, she played a tune she had never heard before. Her hands moved on their own, gliding across the keys. The melody was haunting but beautiful, and as the final note faded, she noticed something strange. Her reflection in the window was gone. At first, she thought it was just the dim light or her tired eyes. But when she stood up and looked in the mirror, her heart froze. She could see the room behind her, the chair, the piano, but not herself. Her breath caught. She reached for her face, and her hand passed in front of where her reflection should have been. It was there. She could feel it, but she couldn't see it. Panic rose in her chest, but before she could scream, the piano made a soft, low sound, even though no one was touching it. She stepped back, trembling. The room seemed to hum, the air vibrating around her. Then slowly, her reflection started to return, first her hands, then her face, until she was whole again. She sat down, shaking. Whatever this was, it wasn't normal. But instead of fear, she felt something else, a pull, like the piano wanted her to come closer. She didn't sleep that night. She just sat beside the piano, staring at it, waiting for it to make another sound. Nothing happened. Only the faint ticking of the clock filled the silence. The next morning, she tried to act normal. At school, she sat in her usual seat at the back of the class. The teacher spoke, students whispered, and she stared out the window, wondering if what happened was just a dream. But when her friend asked if she wanted to join them for lunch, she didn't hear. She was lost in thought, her mind still trapped in that moment when her reflection disappeared. After school, she rushed home. She wanted answers. She lifted the piano lid and ran her fingers across the keys again. Nothing happened at first. Then just as she began to relax, the keys moved slightly on their own. She gasped and jumped back. The piano let out a soft note, almost like it sighed. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The air felt heavier. She tried to step back, but her feet wouldn't move. The piano responded, not with words, but with sound. A soft, gentle melody began to play, one she didn't recognize. Each note carried emotion, loneliness, sadness, longing. It was like the piano was alive and had been waiting for someone to hear its story. Her fear faded, replaced by curiosity. She sat down and joined in, matching its tune. Together, they created something that didn't sound human or machine, it was both. And when the last note fell silent, she felt tears in her eyes. It wasn't just music. It was a conversation. Days passed, and she spent every moment she could with the piano. She stopped going out, stopped talking to people. Her mother grew worried and asked her what was wrong, but she didn't know how to explain. How could she say that her piano was alive? That when she played, the world around her seemed to disappear? One night, she dreamed she was inside the piano. Everything was light and shadow, sound and silence. She saw faces there, blurred, almost transparent, watching her. They weren't threatening, just sad. When she woke, her hands were still moving as if playing invisible notes. She began to notice changes in herself. Her reflection sometimes flickered in mirrors. Her footsteps made no sound. People brushed past her in the hallways without seeing her. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. She really was becoming invisible. And yet she didn't stop playing. Every time she did, she felt closer to something. something beautiful but beyond her understanding. The piano had become her only friend, her only escape from a world that never saw her. But deep down she knew she was losing something too. A part of herself was slipping away with each note. Then one evening, while she was playing a soft lullaby, the door creaked open. Her mother stood there, tears in her eyes. "Please," she said softly, "come back to me. You haven't eaten. You haven't spoken. I'm scared." She looked up, her fingers still on the keys. "I can't stop," she whispered. "It needs me." Her mother shook her head. "No, you need you." She walked over and closed the piano lid gently. For a moment the silence was comforting, but then the piano made a low rumble, deep and angry, like thunder underwater. The girl's heart raced. The lights flickered, the windows rattled. Her mother gasped and backed away. The sound grew louder until it felt like the walls were shaking. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The room went still. Her mother reached for her, but the girl was staring at the piano, frozen. Something inside it had changed. It wasn't just an instrument anymore, it was something alive, and it was watching her. That night, as she lay awake, she realized the truth. The piano hadn't chosen her by accident. It had been waiting for years, maybe longer, for someone who could hear it, who could play its song and bring its voice back. But she also knew something else. Every time she played, a piece of her disappeared into that music. One day there might be nothing left of her at all. Still, as the moonlight touched the keys, she couldn't resist. Her fingers hovered above them, trembling, then pressed down gently. The sound rose, soft and haunting. Somewhere in that melody she thought she heard her own voice calling back. The days that followed felt different for Lena. She woke up each morning feeling like she was living two lives, one that everyone could see and another that no one would ever know. At school she was still quiet, still the girl no one paid much attention to. But at home, when she sat at the piano, she became something else. Someone who could vanish, someone who could walk unseen, someone who finally mattered, even if it was only to the music. Her connection with the piano grew stronger with every passing day. It was like it could sense her moods. If she was upset, it would sound softer, almost comforting. If she was happy, it would echo brighter notes that seemed to fill the room with light. It wasn't just an instrument anymore. It was alive, and she knew it. One Saturday morning, while her parents were out and her brother was at a friend's house, Lena sat at the piano again. She stared at the keys for a long time before placing her hands on them. This time she didn't want to disappear by accident. She wanted to understand how it worked. She took a deep breath and started to play. The melody began softly, each note flowing into the next. As her fingers danced, her thoughts drifted. About school, about being invisible, about how no one really saw her. The feeling inside her chest grew heavier, and that familiar stillness filled the air again. The sounds outside faded, replaced by silence so deep it almost hurt. Then slowly her body faded away. This time she didn't panic. She looked around calmly, though she could see herself only faintly like a shadow made of air. The world around her looked slightly gray, the colors muted. It felt peaceful. She stood up and walked toward the window. Outside, the street looked normal. Cars moving, birds flying. But everything was quieter, like a film with the sound turned off. It was strange, but also beautiful. She walked through the living room, her bare feet barely making a sound. She passed the family photos on the wall and stopped at one of her grandmother. The photo was old and faded, showing her grandmother smiling as she played the same piano. Lena whispered softly, "Did you know what this piano could do?" Of course, there was no answer, but something about the moment made her heart ache with warmth. She returned to the piano and played another tune. As the melody flowed, she felt herself shimmer back into view. When she looked down, her hands were visible again. It was like stepping back into her body. She let out a shaky breath, amazed and frightened all over again. The next few days, Lena couldn't stop thinking about what she had seen while she was invisible. The quiet, the stillness, it wasn't just peaceful, it was freeing. When she was unseen, no one could judge her. No one could ignore her, and no one could hurt her feelings. She was weightless, untouchable. It felt like a dream, one that she didn't want to wake from. But she also noticed something else. Each time she used the piano, she grew more tired afterward. Her hands would feel numb for hours, and her eyes would sting. She brushed it off at first, thinking it was just the strain of playing too long. Still, she couldn't help wondering what the piano was taking from her in return. One afternoon after school, Lena decided to test her power outside her home. She waited until everyone was gone, then sat down and played until she vanished. When she looked down, she could barely see herself. She smiled nervously and stepped away from the piano, her heart racing. She walked through the door and out into the street. The cool air brushed against her invisible skin. The world looked duller, but she could see everything. She passed by two women chatting by the sidewalk. They didn't see her. A dog barked as she walked by, but its eyes looked confused, unsure where the sound was coming from. Lena covered her mouth to stop herself from laughing. For the first time, she felt free, truly free. She walked all the way to the park nearby. The trees swayed gently and the wind carried the scent of wet grass. Children played on the swings, their laughter echoing through the air. No one could see her, but she could see everyone. She watched them for a long time, feeling something stir inside her. She had always wanted to be part of things, to belong. But now, watching them while unseen, she felt like she understood more. People weren't as happy as they looked. Some kids laughed loudly but looked lonely when no one was watching. A couple sat together on a bench pretending to smile while avoiding each other's eyes. The world was full of invisible moments, people hiding how they really felt. Lena stayed there for a while, lost in thought. Then she decided to go back before anyone noticed she was gone. When she returned home and touched the piano again, she reappeared instantly. Her reflection stared back at her from the shiny surface. Her cheeks were pale, her eyes darker than usual. She felt dizzy but smiled softly. "You showed me so much," she whispered to the piano. That night she dreamt of music. Endless notes floating in the air, glowing like tiny lights. She was standing in the middle of them, invisible but not alone. She could hear her grandmother's voice faintly in the background, humming the same melody she always played when Lena was little. The next morning she woke up feeling weak. Her hands ached as if she'd been playing all night. When she tried to stretch her fingers, they trembled. She looked at the piano from across the room, wondering if it had something to do with it. But the thought that scared her most wasn't the pain. It was the idea that she might not be able to play again. Still, she couldn't stay away. That evening, she sat down once more, the setting sun casting long shadows on the floor. She started to play softly, almost afraid of what might happen. As the notes floated through the air, the piano seemed to hum beneath her fingertips like it recognized her touch. She closed her eyes and let the music take her. This time she didn't vanish completely. Instead, her reflection flickered in and out. The sound grew richer, deeper, as if the piano was breathing with her. A strange warmth spread through her chest and she felt tears roll down her cheeks. The piano wasn't just responding to her emotions, it was feeling them too. When the last note faded, she sat still, hands trembling. She whispered, "What are you trying to tell me?" The room stayed silent, but she felt something inside the piano shift slightly, like a sigh. It was both comforting and unsettling. The next day she told herself she would take a break from playing, but by evening she was drawn to it again. It had become part of her. Whenever she sat there, the world made sense. The loneliness, the quiet, the feeling of being unseen, all of it found its place in the music. The piano gave her a way to exist beyond words. One night, as she played with the window open, a passerby stopped outside to listen. A young woman looked up at the house trying to see who was playing, but the curtains hid Lena from view. When the song ended, the woman whispered, "Beautiful," before walking away. Lena heard her and smiled through tears. Someone had noticed her music even if they didn't know who she was. That small moment stayed with her. Maybe she didn't need people to see her face or know her name. Maybe her music was enough. Maybe that was how she would be seen. From then on, she began playing with a different kind of energy. Her songs became more alive, filled with hope and sorrow at the same time. Each night she played until her eyes grew heavy, and each morning she woke up feeling more tired but more complete. Yet somewhere deep inside her, a quiet fear was growing. She knew the piano was changing her. It made her stronger in one way, but weaker in another. Sometimes, when she looked in the mirror, she thought she saw a faint shimmer around her skin, like the border between her and the world was slowly fading. But Lena didn't want to think about that. She just wanted to play. As the days turned into weeks, she started to feel that the piano wasn't just something she played. It was something that was becoming part of her. When she touched the keys, she felt its heartbeat align with hers. It wasn't just an object in her home anymore. It was a friend, a secret, and a mystery all at once. And though she didn't know it yet, every note she played was pulling her closer to a truth she wasn't ready to face. A truth about what the piano really was, and what it wanted from her. But for now, as the moonlight fell across her face and her fingers danced on the keys, she was happy. In that moment, she didn't feel invisible at all. The next morning, Lena woke up earlier than usual. The sun had just started to rise, and the sky outside was painted in shades of pink and gold. She sat on her bed for a while, staring at her hands. They looked the same as always, yet she couldn't stop thinking about what had happened the day before. The piano, the vanishing, the strange quiet that came with the music. It didn't feel like a dream. It had felt too real. She went to the living room quietly, careful not to wake her brother. The piano sat there, still and silent. It almost looked like it was waiting for her. The air around it felt heavy, like it carried a secret. She hesitated for a long time before sitting down on the bench. When she touched the keys, they were cold at first, but then, like before, they seemed to warm under her fingers. She started with a few soft notes, testing the waters. Nothing unusual happened. The sound was calm, gentle, like a whisper. She played a short tune she remembered from a movie, one that always made her smile. The music drifted through the room, peaceful and light. For a moment, she thought maybe everything was back to normal. But as she kept playing, something stirred inside her. It wasn't fear this time. It was curiosity. She wanted to understand what the piano really was, what it could do. So she played one of her grandmother's old songs again, the one that first made her vanish. The melody was slow and emotional, filled with longing. She let herself feel it fully, the loneliness, the quiet pain of being unseen. That's when it happened again. The air grew still. Her surroundings began to blur softly, like fog spreading across a window. The sound of the rain outside faded, replaced by a strange silence that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Her body tingled, as if the notes were running through her veins. She opened her eyes and saw it again. Her reflection had disappeared. Her hands were still moving, but she wasn't there. She froze, terrified but fascinated. She pressed another key and the sound seemed to shimmer through the empty space where she should have been. It felt like she was floating, like her body didn't exist, but her mind was still alive inside the music. She whispered softly, "I'm gone," and her voice echoed faintly, almost swallowed by the stillness. Then, without warning, a small noise from the hallway startled her. Her brother had woken up. His footsteps came closer. Panicking, she stopped playing. Instantly, the air snapped back, the sounds returned, and she was visible again. Her brother peeked around the corner, yawning. "You're playing early today," he said. Lena's heart was pounding, but she forced a small smile. "Yeah, couldn't sleep," he nodded, not noticing anything strange, and walked away. When he was gone, Lena sat still for a long time, her hands trembling slightly. She realized something. No one else could see it happen. It was her secret. Whatever the piano was, it connected only to her. That day at school, she couldn't focus. Every time the teacher spoke, her mind drifted back to the piano. During lunch, she sat alone as usual, but now she didn't feel as invisible. She had a secret power that no one else did. For the first time, being unseen didn't hurt. It felt almost magical. When she got home, she went straight to the piano again. This time she wanted to test how far it could go. She played with purpose, closing her eyes and letting the feeling wash over her. Slowly, she vanished again. Her heart raced, but she stayed calm. She stood up quietly, still unseen, and walked around the room. The sound of her footsteps was faint, like soft wind. She moved her hand past a vase and saw the water inside ripple slightly. Everything looked dim, like she was walking through a shadow version of her house. She looked at her reflection in the window, but there was nothing there. Just the outside world, unchanged. She felt both free and strange, like she had stepped out of her own life. She went back to the piano and touched it again. When her fingers brushed the keys, her body shimmered back into view. Lena sat down slowly, her heart full of mixed feelings. It was thrilling but also scary. The piano wasn't just a musical instrument anymore. It was something alive, something that understood her better than anyone ever had. It was as if it had been waiting for her all along. Over the next week, she practiced every day, learning more about what she could do. She discovered that she only disappeared when she played with deep emotion, when the music truly came from her heart. If she played without feeling, nothing happened. But when she played her real thoughts, her real sadness or hope, the world seemed to fade. At school, things started to shift subtly. She still didn't have friends, but she noticed things she hadn't before. She saw how people treated each other, the fake smiles, the whispered gossip, the moments of kindness no one else noticed. Sometimes she imagined what it would be like to be invisible there, walking past everyone, seeing the truth behind their faces. It made her feel powerful, even if she never showed it. One afternoon, a teacher asked her to stay after class to help organize some papers. While she worked quietly, the teacher said, "You're very quiet, Lena, but I've noticed you always seem to be thinking about something. Do you play an instrument?" Lena hesitated, then nodded. "Piano," she said softly. The teacher smiled. "That explains it. You have that calm about you, like someone who understands silence." The words stayed with her long after she left. Maybe she wasn't invisible after all. Maybe people could see her if they looked closely enough. That evening, she played again, but this time the feeling was different. She wasn't just playing to hide or disappear. She played to understand. The melody that came out was beautiful, soft, sad, and alive. The piano seemed to respond with its own heartbeat. The lights in the room dimmed slightly, and she vanished again. But now she wasn't afraid. She walked through the room unseen, touching the walls, feeling the texture of the furniture, hearing the faint hum of the piano echo around her. The world felt both distant and close. She whispered, "Can you hear me?" And though no voice answered, a low note rang out on its own, deep and gentle. The piano had replied. A strange comfort filled her. It was like she had found a friend in something that couldn't speak but could still understand her completely. From that night, she began to think of the piano as alive, not in a frightening way, but in a familiar one. It didn't want to harm her. It wanted to be with her. Days turned into weeks. Lena's world started to change. She stopped caring about being ignored at school. The pain of being unseen didn't matter anymore, because she had something no one else did. When people walked past her without saying a word, she smiled to herself. They didn't know what she could do. They didn't know she could step out of their world whenever she wanted. Sometimes she used her power just to be alone. When her parents argued or when she felt overwhelmed, she'd play until she disappeared, sit quietly in the invisible stillness and breathe. It was peaceful there. No noise, no expectations, no eyes watching her. Just calm. But she also began to notice something else. Each time she returned, she felt tired, more than before. Her hands would ache slightly, and her heartbeat would feel slow and heavy. It didn't scare her yet, but she could sense that the piano was taking something from her, even as it gave her this strange gift. Still, she couldn't stop. Every night, she returned to it, letting her emotions pour into the keys. She started composing her own songs, melodies that no one had ever heard. They were filled with her secrets, her fears, her dreams. And each time she played, the piano seemed to hum in approval, as if it understood every word she couldn't say out loud. One night, as she finished playing, she noticed a small crack on one of the keys. She ran her finger over it gently. It wasn't there before. For some reason, that small imperfection made her feel sad. She whispered, "Don't break," as if speaking to a friend. The piano gave a faint sound in response, a single note, soft and low. It was almost like a promise. Lena smiled faintly and closed the lid. The house was silent except for the ticking of the clock. She stood there for a while staring at the piano, her heart full of strange feelings she couldn't explain. The world outside might still not see her, but this secret made her feel like she finally mattered. As she turned to leave the room, she thought she heard the faintest echo of her song, still playing on its own, long after she had stopped. It was soft, distant, and hauntingly beautiful. She paused, listening, then smiled to herself. Maybe she wasn't alone after all. Lena was the kind of girl no one noticed. She moved through the school halls quietly, head down, books held close to her chest. If someone bumped into her, they rarely said sorry. If she spoke, her voice was soft, almost like she was afraid her words might bother someone. Most of the time, people forgot she was even there. It wasn't that she wanted to be invisible. It just seemed easier that way. At home, things weren't much different. Her parents worked long hours, often leaving before sunrise and returning late at night. When they did talk to her, it was mostly about school or chores. Her younger brother spent most of his time playing games on his phone. Dinner was quiet, filled with the sound of cutlery clinking and the hum of the refrigerator. Sometimes Lena tried to tell them something about her day, but halfway through she'd realized no one was really listening, so she stopped trying. Her only comfort was her grandmother's piano. It sat in the corner of the living room, old and covered with a thin layer of dust. Her grandmother used to play it every morning before she passed away. Lena still remembered sitting beside her, watching her fingers glide across the keys as she smiled softly. Back then, the house had felt warm and alive. Now it felt empty, but when Lena played for a moment, that warmth returned. Every afternoon after school, she would sit at the piano and let her fingers wander. She never had formal lessons, but she could play by ear. If she heard a song once, she could find it on the keys. It amazed her sometimes. The piano didn't just make sound. It spoke to her in a language she could understand. When her fingers pressed the keys, the world outside disappeared. The noise, the loneliness, the feeling of not belonging, all faded into the melody. Her neighbors could sometimes hear the music through their windows. A few even paused to listen, but they never knew who played. To them, it was just the sound of a piano drifting from an unseen corner of the street. To Lena, it was her way of breathing. One rainy afternoon, the sky was heavy with clouds. School had been particularly hard that day. A group of students had laughed at her during class because she'd dropped her books. It wasn't cruel laughter, but it still stung. By the time she got home, she felt that familiar ache in her chest, the one that told her she didn't fit anywhere. She went straight to the piano. The rain tapped softly on the windows as she lifted the cover and placed her hands on the keys. She began to play a tune her grandmother had loved, a slow, gentle melody that sounded like a lullaby. The notes filled the air, and for a moment everything else melted away. But as she played, something strange happened. The sound changed. It felt deeper, almost alive, as if the piano was answering her sadness. She paused, surprised, then continued. The room felt different, quieter, heavier. The light flickered slightly. Her heart raced, but she couldn't stop playing. The music seemed to wrap around her like a soft blanket, pulling her deeper into it. When the last note faded, Lena sat still. The air felt charged, like after a thunderstorm. She glanced around the room, half expecting to see something or someone. But there was only silence. She laughed nervously at herself. Maybe she was just tired, or maybe the rain was making her feel strange. Still, that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that the piano had somehow understood her. Over the next few days, she played even more. Each time, she felt something new. Sometimes the air grew warmer, sometimes colder. Sometimes she felt her heartbeat match the rhythm of the song. The piano became her secret world, a place where she didn't have to be seen or heard to feel alive. She didn't tell anyone about it. How could she? Who would believe that a piano could listen? At school, things stayed the same. She still sat alone, still walked unnoticed through the halls, but she stopped feeling sorry for herself. She knew that when she got home, she had something waiting for her, something that belonged only to her. When she played, it was like she had a friend who never judged, never spoke, but always understood. One afternoon, as she sat playing with her eyes closed, she felt something unusual. The room grew quiet, but not in a normal way. It was as if all sound had been swallowed up. She kept playing, lost in the music, until a strange thought crossed her mind. What if she could disappear? Not just emotionally, but truly vanish? The idea sent a chill down her spine, but it also filled her with wonder. She opened her eyes and gasped. For a second, just a second, she couldn't see her reflection in the shiny wood of the piano. Her hands were still moving, pressing the keys, but her reflection wasn't there. The shock made her stop instantly, and as she did, the reflection returned. Her heart pounded. She backed away from the piano, staring at it. Nothing about it looked different, yet something had changed. It felt alive now, as if it had been watching her. That night she couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying the moment. Was it her imagination? Maybe the light had shifted. Maybe she'd blinked at the wrong time. But deep down she knew it had been real. Something about that piano wasn't ordinary. The next day after school she hesitated before sitting down to play. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. Then she pressed one note softly. The sound was smooth and calm. She played another, then another. Soon the melody flowed again, gentle and haunting. Her fear melted away as she lost herself in the rhythm. She closed her eyes, letting her emotions pour out through the music. The same strange stillness filled the air again, and when she opened her eyes this time, the room seemed different. The colors were muted, the air felt thicker, and her reflection again was gone. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Her heart was racing, but her hands kept moving on their own, playing faster and faster. It felt like the piano was pulling her in. Then suddenly the final note rang out and everything snapped back. She was there again, breathing heavily, staring at her trembling hands. For a long moment she sat in silence, afraid to move. Then slowly she reached out and touched the piano lid. It felt warm, almost like skin. She whispered softly, as if speaking to a friend. "What are you?" The piano didn't answer, of course. But deep inside she felt something respond, a soft hum like a heartbeat beneath the wood. It wasn't just an instrument anymore. It was something more, something that had been waiting for her. From that day on, Lena couldn't stay away from it. Every chance she got, she played. The more she did, the stronger the connection felt. The piano's sound began to mirror her emotions. When she was happy, it sparkled. When she was sad, it cried. When she felt lost, it wrapped her in melodies that made her believe she wasn't alone. One evening, her mother walked into the living room while Lena was playing. She stood quietly by the door, listening. When the song ended, she said softly, "That was beautiful." It was the first time her mother had said something like that in years. Lena smiled, her chest tightening with warmth. Maybe things could change. Maybe people would finally see her. But even then, she didn't tell her mother what the piano could do. That secret was hers alone. As the days went by, she began to test it. How long she could stay unseen, how far the feeling went. Each time, it was as if the piano allowed her to step out of the world for a while, into a quiet place where she didn't have to exist. It scared her, but it also fascinated her. For once, she had control over something. For once, being invisible didn't feel like a curse. It felt like a gift. That night, before going to bed, she looked at the piano one last time. The moonlight spilled across its surface, and she could almost swear it shimmered slightly. She whispered, "Good night." And in the stillness that followed, she thought she heard a faint echo. A single soft note played in return. Lena smiled in the dark. She didn't know what was happening or why. All she knew was that for the first time in her life, she didn't feel invisible anymore.